On today's show, the Cavs pummeled the Pistons without Donovan Mitchell and without Darius Garland, and it's NBA trade deadline day, so let's talk about that one last time for this year. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
All right, the music you heard on the way in is from our friends at Astro Radio. Check them out on Apple Music or Spotify or wherever you get your music. I'm Chris Manning, covering the Cavs and the NBA at large for places like Down UPROXX, the Just Basketball Show, and SB Nation's Fear the Sword. And that man over there is Evan Dammarell, the proprietor of Down Euclid. I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. To make every moment more, visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Evan, we're going to talk about Cavs Pistons. We're just going to do the one segment today. No game awards for this one because there's not really a need for us to do that after the Cavs beat the brakes off of the Pistons without Darius Garland, without Donovan Mitchell, who were rested in a sense. Look, this is not a game that we're going to look back at and say the Cavs, we learned something about the Cavs or that something was really notable. What matters out of this one is that you got to win against a team you should beat that looked very disorganized, just frankly isn't very good. And you got to a place where Howell Neto and these guys really just filled the minutes you needed. You got to win. You move on. You get the Pelicans, who have struggled of late on Friday. Don't have Zion right now. You're winning the games you're supposed to right now. You can't really ask for much more. And perhaps like the best performance we've seen from them without Garland or Mitchell all year.
I mean, it's the best performance they've had since the last time they played Detroit without Garland or Mitchell. And that was back in November when Cleveland won, I believe, 118-99. But yeah, like you said, the Cleveland just came into this game. They beat up on a very bad Pistons team. Like, let's be frank, this Detroit squad is not good without Cade Cunningham. They're just not good even with Cade Cunningham at the end of the day either. Like, their aspirations are beyond the game-to-game standings. They're focused on like Victor Wembanyama or maybe even Scoot Henderson, or they get real weird with it in the top pick end of the NBA draft. But if you're Cleveland, you have to feel good about the fact that like guys like you said, Howell Neto really stepped up, like really stepped up for Cleveland in the starting spot as the starting point guard for the Cavs in this one. Or like you had Evan Mobley and Jared Allen just remaining like consistently great and just being like the de facto stars, and like we're just enough star power to kind of like keep this game within arm's length from the Pistons and kind of like kept widening that gap a lot. And sure, there's times it was dicey a little bit, especially in the third quarter, but this was a very strong statement win for Cleveland. I wouldn't say statement, actually. It's just a strong win for Cleveland against a bad Pistons squad they should beat even when Detroit's fully healthy, but especially when they're missing Cade Cunningham at the end of the day, like with or without Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, like this is why you get Howell Neto on a free agent contract. Like if he's a minimum guy, you're not going to depend on him to play rotation minutes every night. But what you can do is that he's going to show up and do his job when his number is called. And even because you're still limiting Ricky Rubio's minutes right now, you're not going to start Ricky Rubio. You're going to start Neto, and you're just going to play him, and it's going to work fine. This is why like Robin Lopez, for his maybe he's not the perfect backup center, and some people get like frustrated with him or whatever. This is like a guy who's going to show up, do his job. In this game, he only plays at the end and he makes a three, and it's like all hunky dory. Like you just get competent guys, competent veterans on those minimum deals when you're trying to win games. I don't really think that's good. That's good. Like that is what you want from those spots. Those guys are imperfect. They're not going to like, again, play every night for you. But like on a night where you're getting rest for your two stars and you kind of just cruise to a win, can't really ask for much more. Like the Cavs ultimately like didn't even play like great. This was like an okay performance. They just kind of cruised to win. And when the game got close in the third quarter, they came out in the fourth and blew the brakes off the Pistons, and it got like really ugly from there. And this Pistons team is bad. So good on the Cavs for just like taking care of business.
Yeah, I like, it's just a basketball fan of me empathizes with Dwayne Casey because he's such a good coach and he's just in an untenable position. Like definitely going to get fired after this year at Detroit, I'd say. But the Cavs just, this is encouraging because one, this is a 4-game winning streak they're on now. I believe it's the first 4-game winning streak they've had since mid-December, which is pretty encouraging. We talked about this on Wednesday's show a little bit, where like the Cavs could run the table a little bit, and as they head into this game against Philly next Wednesday, like that could be shaping up like to a serious Eastern Conference standings game, because after this win over Detroit, Cleveland is now a game and a half up on the Brooklyn Nets for the 4th seed, and we'll obviously see what happens with the trade deadline and Kevin Durant. I'll talk about that more in the 3rd or 2nd segment, depending on how the conversation flows. But these are the games that just kind of matter, and you hit the nail on the head on Wednesday's show. Where like, if you're Cleveland and you come in and you lose this game to Detroit, you're kicking yourself at the end of the season, because this game against the Pistons could be the great equalizer on whether or not like you're avoiding the play-in tournament or you're hosting in the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. So like, this was just a game the Cavs needed to come in and take care of business of. Like they have like a different edge to them ever since that Heat game. And it's just kind of refreshing to watch them play with like a little bit of rejuvenation, especially when this is about the peak point where teams start to bog down a little bit and they start to coast because the All-Star break is within sight.
Yeah, you mentioned Philly loses to Boston, so the Cavs are now closer to Philly. Could set up a very big game in the last game for the All-Star break next week in Philadelphia. That's going to be a juicy one if the standings kind of hold the way they are as of right now. Evan, the other thing I just feel like we should hit on that was said post game that isn't necessarily new based on how the last couple of games have gone, but Kevin Love is out of the rotation right now. We haven't talked about this. I think we will do a segment on this at some point. JB Bickerstaff was asked about this directly, like, why isn't Kevin playing? And he said very shortly, we're trying to give this rotation a chance right now. Maybe it's the thumb. I think the thumb is at the root of why Kevin really struggled, but he's out of the rotation right now. I don't expect him as a teaser for what we're going to talk about to be moved at the deadline. It's just a salary situation with him, but he's out of the rotation right now, and it makes sense, as much of a bummer as it is, considering what he's meant to this organization and how good he was last year. I think that was a real 6-man of the year thing, and he was really good to start the year again. It's a bummer, but it's just, I think, the reality of where Love is at based on how he's playing up until he is on the bench.
I think it's a little bit of column A, column B. I think it is the thumb injury. I know JB Bickerstaff said it wasn't going to impact him, but then Love told Chris Fedor at Cleveland.com that, yeah, the thumb injury is affecting his shooting form. And if you're Kevin Love, if you're not providing 3-point spacing and all you're really giving is rebounding and pretty lackluster defense just because you have feet made of cement, like that's just not going to do it for the Cavs at the end of the day. Like, it's hard. I think with Dean Wade coming back, that's the other column of it, is like Wade coming back and feeling a little bit more comfortable out there physically as well. Just makes this an easier decision just to kind of say, like, listen, Dean Wade is likely part of our immediate future if we as in we're the Cavs. And you focus on that aspect instead. We're like, okay, we'd rather probably play Wade, get him comfortable with Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland when they are available, Allen, Mobley, and just the rest of the rotation as well, rather than giving minutes to Kevin Love, who just isn't functional as a player right now. And like you said, I don't think he's going to be a salary dump at the deadline today. And I don't expect him to be traded at all. I quite frankly expect him to be back in Cleveland as you can see this summer. So we'll obviously see what happens. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but it's a bummer for sure. But the thumb injury has had an impact on it. But also we talked about this leading into the season. Like, there is a very real chance that Kevin Love could not sustain the season he had last year coming off the bench. And I think we're kind of seeing a little bit of a window into that. I know injury does certainly play a huge part in that, but we're also just kind of seeing like a guy who is in his mid-30s, who isn't athletically like dominant and is quite often injury prone, just showing a lot of his wrinkles and lumps at the same time. And now you look at it like, it's not necessarily an albatross for Cleveland just because the Cavs are winning, and they're winning despite not having Love on the floor. But like, you do look at it, you're like, oh man, I wish you could do something with that spot. But like, how vital he is emotionally and off the court to the Cavs, it's just like, that's where the trade aspect just doesn't come into play for me.
Yes. All right, let's go into a break. We're going to come back and we're going to start talking about the trade deadline. That is obviously Thursday. Last time all of the season, the Cavs can make moves. Will they? And we're going to ask, do they really need to make a move at all? We'll debate that. I'm sure Kevin Love's going to come up in that conversation as well. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner at Locked On because they're the #1 sportsbook in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can get a free get a free bet on Super Bowl 57 with a no sweat first bet. You get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. Join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, back here, Locked On Cavs podcast. Chris Manning and Evan Dammarell here with you. Evan, I'm going to ask you open-ended question here. Do the Cleveland Cavaliers at the 2022-2023 season deadline, do they need to make a trade?
No, I don't think they do. We talked about this a little bit just with the different avenues we explored how the Cavs tackle the trade deadline, whether it's rolling money over or just trading Caris LeVert in general. Like, I question the fit of Caris LeVert with this team currently, just because you have Ricky Rubio, you have Donovan Mitchell, you have Darius Garland. Like, a lot of your ball handling responsibilities are soaked up, and LeVert isn't necessarily like super functional without the ball in his hands. Like, yeah, he's shown it at times that he can play off ball, but like, it's not his best role at the end of the day. But that's your major trade chip. And let's be frank, the Cavs emptied the clip to get Donovan Mitchell over the summer. That was their major move. And now it's working within the margins and just kind of what they have left. And as we're recording this, like, Josh Hart is going to New York for Cam Reddish. Like, those are two names off the board for Cleveland. Guys maybe like Josh Richardson or Doug McDermott or Luke Kennard could still be available in the ether, but we'll see what happens between now and we're recording this on February 8th at 11:15 p.m. and February 9th, the day of the actual trade deadline. So you just remain to be seen. Like, yeah, the Cavs just don't need to make an offer or a move because they got Donovan Mitchell. That was their big move. And now they can kind of just shift focus on, hey, if a trade materializes that works for us and doesn't really like hamstring our future production, sure, let's go for it. But at the end of the day, you don't really need to either. Like, you don't need to make a trade for the sake of just making a trade if you're Cleveland right now.
I agree with that. I think with where they're at, there's not a need to force anything. I don't know if there's anyone that is reasonably out there that they could get that is necessarily going to change the trajectory of this season, right? Like, I think you could get Josh Richardson, and that could be a guy that could help. But is he 100% improvement over everything you have? I don't think that's a lock. I don't think anything you're really, really going to get that is out there right now is particularly just for sure going to change it. And that's partially because they don't. I think, Evan, part of this answer is that they don't have the ammo to go get the kind of thing that would really change things, right? Like, they don't have a first round pick to trade. The good players, the really useful players at this deadline are requiring first round picks. Because you don't have that first round pick, because you don't have that asset to work with, you're in a spot where, like, any trade you make isn't a needle moving trade necessarily. And this team is good as it is too. Like, this is just a good team.
Yeah. And the team itself just announced that President of Basketball Operations, Kobe Altman, or Vice President of Basketball Operations, whatever his formal title is going to speak to the media at 3 p.m. tomorrow. So
right at the deadline.
Right at the cusp of the deadline itself. So if it kind of isn't like a glimpse into the window of like the Cavs not really making moves, maybe that is. But yeah, you and I are on the same page. Like, if a trade materializes, like, let's say the Clippers say, like, hey, Cleveland, we really want Caris LeVert because we want to get off Luke Kennard's contract, and we'll take it for Caris LeVert, like a future second round pick or two. Like, hey, if you're Cleveland, you're remiss not to say yes to that. But if you're the Cavs, like, you have to feel pretty comfortable with where you're at. Like, in the grand scheme of things, like in terms of advanced metrics, they're a top 3 defensive team. They're number 1 some days. It depends on who they play. They think they just broke into the top 10 in terms of offensive rating as well. So, like, they're very balanced on both ends of the floor. And like, when they're hitting at their apex, it makes things a lot easier for them. But more than anything, I think I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse quite yet. But Isaac Okoro playing so well ever since he joined the starting lineup, just as a starting 3 and kind of being what the Cavs need right now is like that connective tissue between offense and defense, whether it's Okoro's more so his defensive impact and the fact that like he's hitting his threes now, kind of mitigates the need for the Cavs to make like a serious upgrade. And now that like Dean Wade's healthy and getting back, you have Ricky Rubio out there just running the tempo of the offense with the bench unit. Jetty Osman is still sometimes hit or miss, but he's been more hit than miss lately. Like the Cavs could have the pieces to obviously break into the playoffs and maybe make some noise in the first round and then get into the second round or possibly the Eastern Finals, depending on how things break. But the Cavs are in a lot better of a spot. And we talked about this maybe 10, 15, 20 games into Donovan Mitchell's tenure with Cleveland. Like they're further ahead of schedule than I thought they would be at this point. And I think that's a pretty good place to be for Cleveland.
Yeah, like this team is good now because of the move it made in the summer. Exactly. And because of getting Evan Mobley and because of drafting Darius Garland and because of getting Jared Allen. Like this team is good without having to retool things or really make any move. I think like there is another move to make down the line to really elevate what this is to another level. Like I think there's a world where like, you know, Karis LeVert resigns his contract and they flip him for something else. They can trade a first, or maybe there's a really nice MLE thing they could get in the summer and there's something that works there. Like there's ways that this could work in the future where I think they make the move that could really elevate what this roster is. But for what this season is, and for how it kind of is shaking out, I don't think a move is wholly necessary. I also just find myself, Evan, just kind of wondering, like, am I just thinking this in part because, like, I think ultimately I just think there's not a move that really kind of does change things. Like, you know, the Clippers thing is a good shot. Like, if they called on Kennard, you'd have to consider, I think, the same thing about Robert Covington, considering he's kind of out of the rotation. Like, I think those are names that make some sense. But are those moves that like fully change things for you? No. And at the same, and on the other thing is the Cavs like don't need a reshuffling to really figure out what's going on here, right? Like they are not the Lakers. They're not even like the Timberwolves who kind of needed to shuffle some things and move some pieces around and kind of make things function better. This team already functions really well as is. It's about looking, I think it's like more of a, not just this year thing, but the multiple years thing about how to make it function best. And if you decide that your assets and using things that maybe could be useful in a trade down the line are not best used now, just for the sake of a minor improvement now, because you're eyeing something bigger later, I think that's a pretty reasonable belief. And this kind of teases up the next segment. That to me feels like where we're headed here. Yeah.
And I agree with you. And I know Brian Windhorst from ESPN did tease the fact that like, hey, things could change between now and 3 p.m. February 9th with Kevin Durant and the Nets. And if that were to happen, I think like that's a seismic enough shift where the internal calculus for Cleveland changes a little bit and they kind of reevaluate their priorities. Maybe they go to Brooklyn and say like, listen, let's talk shop for Joe Harris or Royce O'Neal or maybe even TJ Warren if the Cavs really want to get super cheap with it too. Because like the Nets will obviously be going into a little bit more of like a rebuild, retooling mode if they trade KD. But I believe it was Mark Stein, maybe it was Jake Fisher as well, who said like a lot of teams are waiting for that domino to drop, and you're seeing a couple teams like whether it's New York or I mean Los Angeles did make like a pretty decent shift, but those mostly those exclusively between Western Conference teams. But like a lot of teams are waiting to see what happens with Kevin Durant and the Nets. And like, let's say something does happen. Yeah, it shifts things a lot. But between now when we're recording this and possibly when this episode airs, Kevin Durant's still with the Brooklyn Nets. And I firmly believe the Cavs are one, more than okay with not making a move, and two, likely won't make a move unless it's something just really small to maybe either acquire assets or just give them some more financial wiggle room when the buyout market starts to open up.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like they think they do have an rush, but they could flip like if Windler goes somewhere, just like dump some salary for like maybe a guy that actually might play a minute or something like. But that's like $4 million. Like that's not really a lot of money to really work with. But let's go into one more break. We're gonna come back, give some final predictions on the deadline. But first, I want to remind you that the NBA trade deadline is approaching and Locked On has you covered. Thursday, February 9th, tune in to Locked On NBA 2 p.m. Eastern Time to hear reaction from the trades that will change the rest of the NBA season, who becomes contenders, and who is tanking for a better future. Subscribe to Locked On NBA on YouTube and don't miss a deal. Right back. All right, last segment, Locked On Cavs podcast. Chris Manning and Evan Dammarell here with you. Evan, final predictions for the trade deadline. Give me like a final thought about if the Cavs do anything, if they don't. I think it is worth noting, and we hit on this a bit. Josh Hart is going to the Knicks.
Mm-hmm.
Cam Reddish
is going
back to Portland. Those are two names that have been linked to the Cavs to varying strengths. The Hart stuff I think was a little bit stronger. The interest there was a little bit more real. But those guys are off the board. Those guys are not getting moved. Malik Beasley off the board. There are other names out there, obviously, but as we sit here recording this just before midnight on the 8th, final predictions.
I think Cleveland, again, to your point, Dylan Windler's contract is $4 million. So it's not like a ton of money for Cleveland to work with, but maybe they've tried to finesse a way to offload Windler's salary because he just hasn't played yet and he isn't a reliable player. And you try to offload that salary with a couple second round picks to maybe get a guy that's either worth like long-term aspirations with like clearly the goal being Cam Reddish in a second round pick to New York for Windler, Cam Reddish for Dylan Windler in a second round pick. But like you look at guys like that, maybe there's like a long-term answer there, but it's a little bit of rearranging deck chairs on a ship that's already sinking. Not sinking, staying afloat if you're Cleveland, but it's just, I just don't think they make a move. Like you said, Josh Hart being gone is a huge strike against them. Like that was a name that was very hotly rumored with them. Maybe there's Josh Richardson. Maybe there is Doug McDermott if that materializes out of the ether as well. Maybe it is Luke Kennard or Robert Covington as well. Like you said, Malik Beasley going to Los Angeles. I'm happy for him, but I don't think the Cavs feasibly can make a move because, again, their major move was getting Donovan Mitchell, which when you look at the grand scope of just like major offseason additions, DeJounte Murray's playing very well in Atlanta, but he doesn't hold a candle to how well Donovan Mitchell's clicked with Cleveland. And that was their major move. And if you're Cleveland, you make that move 10 times out of 10.
I think there's no deal. I don't think Kevin's going anywhere. I don't think.
Yeah, that would just, the Kevin Love thing would rock the boat, I think, too much.
I don't even think it's that. I just think that factors in, but I think beyond that, like expiring contracts don't have the same value they used to. They're not like these like albatross contracts of like maybe useful players, but overpriced in other situations that you can use expiring money to like help a team get off of or like get assets back to like take on a contract and sneak in another good player, fair. Right? Yeah. Like Kevin has like a salary you could theoretically like turn it into two players. I just don't think that's going to happen. I agree with it. I think like that, like it's very possible he is back on a deal in the summer. We'll see what that could look like. I also don't think Karras is going anywhere. I think what ultimately happens with Karras is that he's probably re-signed and then like either I don't know what that number looks like. I've kind of been like talking about this with people and like I tend to think it's probably a little bit lower than I think what he might be looking for. I just can't see him getting like maybe like let's say like an increase on what he's making right now. Like he's not an $18 million a year player ultimately. And like but do you artificially inflate the number a little bit? Do you start it at like a higher number in the first year or something like that to appease him in some way in his agents and things? I don't know. I don't think he's going nowhere though. I think like there are moves you could do with him that maybe they pop up. You know, maybe something comes up. Sometimes stuff does happen at the last minute, and this is a trades and extensions league in a lot of ways now. Like free agency mattered for the top guys, but this is a trades and extend guys league in a lot of ways right now. Maybe something happens. I can't, from looking around, from seeing guys that I know the Cavs like being off the board, from just what other teams have to offer. I just don't see something that is like there. And like that obviously doesn't mean nothing will happen. Jared Allen came out of nowhere, right? Like that is like the biggest, like this just happened. I just can't even like, unless it is something like Durant, where you can sneak in and as they're tearing it down, you sneak in and you grab things that are useful from that situation. I just don't see something on the board that is like obviously there.
No, I agree. And like Kevin Durant is seismic enough that it would shift the calculus of just what's happening, especially in the Eastern Conference. And this is a team that you already have distance from and like go ahead and pick the carcass from it. But I don't see anything else. Like maybe there's an opportunity for Cleveland to finagle things with Chicago if they try to move Lonzo Ball somewhere else. Like, let's say like Terry Rozier goes to Chicago, and just this hypothetical, and Lonzo Ball goes to Charlotte, and the Cavs somehow get something just to grease the wheels. But the issue is, like you mentioned,
Andre
Jared
Drummond.
Allen. The issue is, yeah, the Andre Drummond trade's a trade that kind of came out of nowhere. Like, it came down right down to the wire for Cleveland. But the issue is the Cavs in the Jared Allen scenario had a lot more assets to work with versus now when they have emptied the clip to get Donovan Mitchell from the Utah Jazz. And that's fine. That's the kind of moves you have to make to get a star caliber player at the end of the day. But now just kind of takes them out of the race. I think just being mindful of the fact that they are bumping right up against the luxury tax threshold. And this is a team that, frankly, like, I'm not going to tell Dan Gilbert or the Cavs front office how to spend Dan Gilbert's money, but like, frankly, this isn't a team you go into the luxury tax for quite yet. And you just kind of reevaluate what you have. You just keep evaluating what you have across the board. Maybe Isaac Okoro keeps like this kind of like really strong resurgence as the starting three for Cleveland. It just becomes that connective piece. Or now the Cavs shift their focus to the buyout market. They do have one open roster spot. They could make the uncomfy conversation because Neto and Lopez are on veteran contracts. Like, yes, that technically counts against cap, but like you can finagle that a little bit too. Or maybe you just find guys that are just didn't end up getting traded. Like maybe Nerlens Noel gets bought out by the Pistons, and like you consider that instead of having just Robin Lopez as like your third emergency big. So you have just like a fourth big in the event like Jared Allen or Evan Mobley need extra time off down the stretch of the season. Like there's ways you can navigate this if you're Cleveland, but they've set themselves up really nicely just where if they had to make a trade, yeah, they could do it, but it's not out of desperation at this point. Like they're not in a similar situation to the Lakers where Russell Westbrook just like isn't a tenable point guard for playing alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And like they had to go make a pretty dramatic move, and they got D'Angelo Russell, Jared Vanderbilt, and Malik Beasley for the troubles. Like that's a really good trade for them. But like if you're the Cavs, you made your dramatic move over the summer. Again, I keep like hammering this point home, but like they are now set up in a spot where like they don't have to panic and again make a trade for the sake of making a trade. Like that it's a good spot to be in if you're Cleveland.
Yeah, like I think like two apt comparisons are the other teams that made big moves in the offseason. The Wolves felt the need to go get Mike Conley and recreate.
Wait. They went to go get Rudy Gobert over the summer, dude.
Well, no. I'm saying they made that big Rudy Gobert trade in the summer, and then at this deadline, that trade is they go get Mike Conley because they're like, oh, we need a point guard, and let's just recreate some of what the Utah Jazz did. Like that is part of what happened there.
There's a little more to it. They can't afford to keep D'Lo at this point, and they need a point guard under guaranteed money just because they traded for Rudy. Like if they didn't get Rudy Gobert, they wouldn't have made this trade to the Lakers tonight.
Okay. But like they felt the need that like what was there wasn't fully working, and they wanted like the steadier hand of Mike Conley.
That's fair. That is fair.
Lord knows what the Hawks are doing, but like the Hawks are in this position where they're way out of the playoff seating. Like a lot of the trades you've seen them kind of linked to are like, okay, like, can they duck the tax? Like these teams have like other weird pressing needs. The Cavs are just sort of like they're good, they're fine as is. I understand like if you're like a diehard and you're like I feel like they should just chase being all in here. I can understand that. I don't see deals that are even just like or like there are needs, but there are not needs I think you can fill. Is like the thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's
like,
not
unless you want to eat like bad money. Like you could like probably call Miami and be like, hey, we'll eat Duncan Robinson's contract. You shouldn't do that. You know,
that's signs of growth. This podcast, Justin Rowan. But yeah, like we talked about money rollovers and such, but like Duncan Robinson is just not a good contract at the end of the day. So that doesn't work. And there's just not a lot of scenarios out there either, because I think a lot of teams also maybe don't want to do business. Like this is just me like projecting a little bit, but like maybe teams don't want to do business with Cleveland either because they don't want to like help the Cavs build like the next Eastern Conference contender, because this is a team they have to remain competitive with because the Eastern Conference is hyper competitive this season.
Yeah. Curious to see what deadline day brings. I'm itching for, we got the Kyrie trade, we got the Lakers trade, so like the couple big dominoes.
Give me your next broad stroke trade.
I feel like Jakob Poeltl is going somewhere.
That's
And
not very broad. For you, that's broad, but for the folks at home, give me a broad stroke trade.
Yeah, Chris being like, let's talk about the very competent but like kind of boring center is just like a really good big thing for me.
If you're a regular listener, before the Cavs got Jared Allen, Chris was calmly banging his fist against the desk for the Cavs to go get Jakob Poeltl
instead of paying Andre Drummond. Yeah, that was. I to be clear, I was correct. I would say I'd be curious to see. I think the Clippers are doing something, and I feel like it's probably going to be Fred VanVleet.
I think it's Fred VanVleet. That makes sense.
Conley's off the board.
Yeah.
And John Wall is like, it's been already reported that he's like getting bought out or traded. They need a point guard. Yep.
I think it's that, or maybe Phoenix finds a way to move on from Chris Paul, even though DeAndre Ayton and Cam Johnson have both publicly advocated for keeping Chris Paul.
That would be cold-blooded.
It would be cold-blooded, but that's just... the Suns also were reportedly planning on hiring Isaiah Thomas, and it's clearly they don't care about optics, but it's that, or... I don't know. Like the Josh Hart trade, I really like that for New York. I think him and Brunson together are going to be fun. Like that's just a defensive grinder for Thibs to work with. I really like this trade for the Lakers. Like the fact that Pelinka didn't have to give up 2 first-round picks, and the fact that this first-round pick conveys into 2 seconds if it doesn't translate. Like the Lakers could do some tricky stuff in 4 years' time to make sure it doesn't go to Utah in that sense. But it's kind of, I don't know. It's fascinating to watch other teams do it. I think the Poeltl trade does happen to Toronto, and that's great for them. I wonder if the Bucks do something a little interesting just to kind of upgrade the back end of their rotation.
Is Jay Crowder going anywhere tomorrow? Like,
I don't know. Like today, what if the Knicks and the Blazers expand this trade and they pivot like Josh Hart to Phoenix, or sorry, Josh Hart still goes to New York, but like Cam Reddish goes to Phoenix instead, and like Jay Crowder goes to Portland. Like, cause like the move for the Blazers, like on the Blazers side of things, confuses me because they're saying we want to win now. We want to make sure we build around Dame properly, but like Svi Mihalik, Ryan Arcidiacono, first round pick that will convey into 4 seconds, and Cam Reddish certainly doesn't scream to me that like, hey, we're trying to make the playoffs with Dame Lillard in his prime.
Yeah, Hart's just expiring, I think is why that deal happens.
Yeah, that's part of it for sure. But like, yeah, you could have gotten a little better for that.
Yeah. I hope Eric Gordon.
Maybe the Cavs go get boss man.
No, dude, that would be like
that would crater the chemistry in this locker.
Well, I don't even want to go that far because I don't like Jay Crowder. I just feel like Cavs Twitter would like implode. Like Twitter's already breaking in front of our eyes, but that's like,
hey man, if
take us back to the 2018 is not a
thing. Elon Musk, like Kevin O'Connor, you can post a small book on Twitter while the rest of us can't. So,
well, say lovey. All right, that's gonna be it. It's deadline day. Don't think the Cavs are doing anything. Don't think like that Tim Hardaway option is really gonna happen. Don't really get. I think that's kind of feels off the table as of right now. We'll see what other teams do, and come Friday, we'll break it all down here. What the Cavs didn't do, what Kobe Allman has to say about deadline day, and how the East looks, how the top of the East looks post trade deadline day. Always a fun day of the year. Hope we get something a little crazy that is maybe a little more adventurous than Jakob Poeltl. Give me like a ghost pepper instead of just like the like green pepper.
Kevin Durant trade for Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton.
As someone who hosts a podcast with someone who lives in Phoenix and covers the Suns, I would like to watch Brennan Clean's brain explode. Personally, I would like to watch that explode. Yes, he just like can't talk because his brain is just like malfunctioning of thinking about the Kevin Durant thing happening. Like,
even.
Yes. Look, it's late. I covered a basketball game tonight, Evan. I watched Nerlens Noel shoot a shot so bad that I don't know if it counts as a brick because it didn't hit the rim.
That's an air ball then.
But it like hit the backboard. So it wasn't an air ball. I don't even know what to call it. It was horrendous. And he played 3 minutes. And it was an amazing 3 minutes of just horrendous basketball for Nerlens Noel. Okay, we got to get out of here. I'm Chris Manning. That's Evan Dammarell. Thanks again to Jake Stevens for producing us. Thanks again to FanDuel for sponsoring the entire Locked On Network. Back at you tomorrow. Check out the Locked On Deadline Show. We're out of here.